With very few exceptions, the cost of AVD is too damn high. Let me show you why. So a few months ago, I gave a talk at Tech Mentor Redmond called AVD, Is It Worth the Hype and Cost? And I think I traumatized more than a few of the attendees with my real-world assessment of AVD's true costs. Until that point, all they had been exposed to was the Microsoft marketing hype about AVD. If you're evaluating AVD as an alternative to RDS, you have to understand that Microsoft's goals are not necessarily aligned with your goals. Microsoft wants you to bring more of your IT infrastructure into Azure because they can then generate revenue off of all your VM compute spend, and they can upsell you on other Azure services like Premium Azure AD, Azure NetApp Files, Azure Monitor, Azure Site Recovery, Express Route, and the list goes on and on. The more you commit to various Azure services, the more you get locked into Azure, where you often get stuck paying more, especially compared to running your infrastructure on premises or in a private colo facility. You must also understand that cloud service providers' goals aren't necessarily aligned with your goals either. If you stay with RDS, they won't make any money migrating you to AVD, they won't make any money doing ongoing consulting around your new AVD deployment, and they won't make any money reselling Azure services to you. To sum up, just follow the money to understand the reason behind the relentless marketing hype out of Microsoft, CSPs, and cloud/Azure experts that shill AVD 24/7. Now, before I tell you why AVD costs too damn much, are there use cases where AVD might make sense for your organization? Sure there are. One example is if you have a seasonal business where you have tons of temp employees working for a few months of the year, and the rest of the year you have a skeleton staff. In that scenario, you can use AVD to scale up for a few months and then scale everything back for the rest of the year. Another scenario is setting up AVD as a backup for your regular RDS platform for failover. That could make sense. You can leave all of your VMs powered off in AVD and Azure unless your RDS deployment goes down, then you can spool them up for failover. The rest of the time the VMs can be powered off and you're only paying for storage. But based on real-world numbers I've run, when you compare AVD to running RDS on premises or in a private colo facility, it always comes out 2 to 4 times more expensive. This may surprise you because Microsoft loves to tout their loss leader around AVD licenses being free if you own a qualifying edition of Microsoft 365 apps. But as you'll see in my comparison, RDS CALs, especially amortized over time, only make up a small fraction of the total cost associated with running remote desktop services. AVD marketeers also like to talk about how you can scale up and down resources each day to match when your employees use the service. But again, this doesn't buy you savings compared to running RDS on premises or in a colo facility. It just makes AVD go from astronomically more expensive to a few times more expensive than RDS. Anyway, let's look at a real-world bake-off between AVD and RDS and do some cost comparisons. In this first slide, I used Microsoft's own AVD cost calculator for an organization with 500 users. I assume 90% of users connected during peak and only 5% during off-peak. I also used their default assumption that each user would use the VMs for 220 hours per month. The calculator recommended 70 VMs, so I chose D12 series VMs that each had 4 vCPUs and 28 gigs of RAM. This means each user would have about 4 gigabytes of RAM and would have half of a vCPU. For storage, I used 70 P10 premium SSD disks with 500 IOPS bursting to 3000 IOPS. For user profile storage and other application file and database storage, I budgeted 5 terabytes of Azure NetApp files. And finally, I factored in 1500 gigabytes of bandwidth. In this model, I assumed the customer owned a qualifying Microsoft 365 license package, so they'd get the AVD CALs for free. You can see the total annual cost running around $117,000 and the per user per year cost to be right at $234. But let's say you're an organization that doesn't own a qualifying Microsoft 365 or Windows 10 subscription, or you're an independent software vendor who hosts your app via remote desktop services. In that case, you'll have to pay an additional $5 to $10 per user per month for AVD CALs. Assuming the same virtual machine, storage, and bandwidth from the previous slide, you now will be paying nearly $177,000 per year, or $354 per user per year. Now let's look at an RDS environment where you amortize hardware and licensing costs out over 5 years. 5 years, by the way, is the average lifespan for most commercial-grade servers, no matter how often cloud experts like to say it's only 3 years. In this case, I buy 2 massive Dell PowerEdge servers, each having 32 cores, a terabyte of RAM, and 4 terabytes of SSD drives. For my profile and application and database storage, I get a 16 terabyte rack-mountable NAS. I then purchase the necessary Windows Server data center licensing, 500 standard perpetual CALs for Windows Server, and 500 perpetual RDS CALs. I factor in $500 per month in colo hosting costs to start. Amortizing this over 5 years, I spend about $45,000 per year total, and about $90 per user per year. So summing up the bake-off, AVD costs between 2 and 4 times more than RDS running on premises or in a colo. Now I know what the AVD fanboys and girls are going to say. You save on IT personnel spend by putting things into Azure, but I'd argue that you'll spend quite a bit on consulting to lift and shift your environment out of RDS into AVD, which somewhat negates their argument. Others will challenge why I chose Azure NetApp Files instead of a lower tier of Azure File Storage, to which I would respond that I'm trying to give enough storage IOPS to the environment to make AVD perform comparably to RDS. In my opinion, any Microsoft sales weasel or Azure Cloud consultant that says they can bring AVD costs down to what you're paying for RDS on premises is probably shaving IOPS, which means your environment will be slower and less performant in AVD compared to what you currently have in RDS, which will piss your user base and management off, and you'll be fighting a lot of fires as a result. All of the above said, I haven't even touched on other problems with AVD. Things like a lack of a financially backed SLA for Azure Virtual Desktop when AVD role services or Azure AD go down, issues with VM capacity in certain Azure regions and not always being able to spool up a VM that's been turned off, all of the licensing gotchas around AVD, cloud resource contention in general, dealing with apps that don't like lower network IOPS and or higher network latency, the true cost of connecting your other on-premises infrastructure to Azure and or lifting and shifting that infrastructure into Azure, less effective UDP support over RDP and AVD compared with the good old-fashioned remote desktop gateway, and so on and so on. But don't worry, I'll tackle some of these topics in a later video. The bottom line is, when it comes to AVD, caveat emptor. Do your homework and do an honest and complete cost comparison before you consider a migration away from RDS. Hi there. If you'd like me to make more of this content, please do one of the following. First, like this video and click the notification bell below to subscribe to the RDP Hard channel. Second, download my company's free Remote Desktop Commander Lite tool to help you manage sessions on your RDS and AVD farms. It's more powerful and much faster than the built-in RDS manager. Third, consider purchasing my RDP Own book on how to secure your RDS environments. It's only $9.99 on Amazon Kindle. Fourth, start a subscription to one or more of my company's commercial RDS and AVD monitoring and management tools. We offer very affordable monthly subscriptions you can use for as little or as long as you need. I think you'll find we deliver more value than just about any other RDS monitoring tool in the marketplace. Thank you. See you on my next video.